welcome back everybody to Red Hot Talk episode 20. It has been a long time, right? And it's very good. So how is everybody? And I hope that you all enjoy your day. And London is very wet at the moment. I'm not sure about you, Rod.
It is absolutely dreadful.
Yeah.
It's just pouring down.
No, not a day to go out. So for
No,
those who are new to us, and this live chat is all about photography, filmmaking, creative, and gear, and so forth. Anything to do with cameras, really. And so today we're gonna have a little bit of an interesting talk today. I've seen the title. This is obviously contribute to what we are going to discuss today, and the main theme is actually surrounding getting the right tool for the right job. And myself specific, I mean, I've used full frame before. I've used Micro Four primarily now, and Rod has used multiple different formats, and he can share all his experience in different usage. And also between Rod and I, we can have a lot of experience to share about what is best for what kind of scenarios and things like that. And I'm pretty sure that you all agree that that there is no one camera or one system that can satisfy every single thing that you do in life. And like I for instance, like as much as a photographer and maybe a very serious cinematographer these days, I still use my iPhone a lot, simply when I'm going about with my family, young kids. You something want just quick, just something casual. You don't necessarily need the highest quality for that kind of content. Those are really for memory's sake. But of course, if you want to take a nice portrait for kids, you might whip out your nice camera with a nice lens on it, and then just snap some portrait with a little bit of a blur in the background, create some of those a lovely look to it. So Rod, in your experience, and you handle so many different formats now, medium format, and full frame, APS-C, Micro Four Thirds, whatnot, every single thing you probably touched in the last 20 years. And would you agree with me? There's no one system, one format that can do it all.
absolutely, for sure. I mean, I've probably tried harder than most people to find a perfect camera, I'm forced to the conclusion that at any one time I probably want two or three, possibly three, because I do so many different kinds of things, and what you need for the camera for these different jobs is itself very different. So, um, I might love using my Nikon D800, and I've got a 24 to 120 f4 for that. But there's no way I'm taking that on holiday. That's probably all my excess baggage used up in one go, I should think. But for travel, I'd certainly have a different camera. So the camera I might use for landscapes, and very often, if I'm doing a tutorial or a how-to for a magazine, that will dictate the type of camera that I use. Because very often you might know what camera is best for the job, but sometimes the client thinks they know as well. So you know what they say, the customer is always right. So if you do photography for a living, very often the customer will have requirements about your hardware.
Absolutely. I mean, and totally agree to that. And as harsh as it may sound, I'm not trying to be horrible to people who are not in the professional industry or earning money from cameras. And quite often I think that a lot of consumers and camera enthusiasts, they may not be aware in terms of the hardware specifications is sometimes what dictates what a photographer or filmmaker uses. For instance, some paparazzis, and for the journalists who go out and shoot images for newspapers and magazines, and they often don't need high resolutions because a lot of the images are simply downsized into a very small print online, or sometimes even on magazine you don't need 50 megapixels. All they ever need is probably 4 or 5 megapixels. So they're given a camera primarily specifications will be geared for autofocus speed and trackings and the things that they can do quickly on the in the field. And similarly in wedding industries, we have kind of similar priorities. Resolution doesn't always come into place. And then in commercial, of course, when you have some studio environments, when they are specifically designed to produce work that can enlarge to huge sizes, and that's when you need 50, 60, even 100 megapixel cameras. And they are not also the type that will take out to do things, and because so photography is such a broad subject. You know, a lot of people may not actually fully understand how broad it is when you're actually starting to work in the field, starting to earn money from it, starting to maybe start a business in photography. Then you start to realize, oh wow, you know, I don't need this, I don't need that, because you're not being asked to produce those stuff, and whatever you have may actually just a little bit over the top to what you need, and what you're getting now and paying the extra doesn't necessarily get the reward or return on investment, or the money you pay for it, for instance. And there's like a lot of maybe there are people who are very rich and manage to get some cine cameras and just to film YouTubes, and you know, but in reality, is do you really need a cine cameras for YouTube videos? You know, because everything's compressed anyway when you view online. And don't get me wrong, you know, they're a nice thing to have. You know, just like if you have money, buy a Ferrari, and but not necessarily that everybody can, you know, or need those stuff.
No, quite. And I think particularly with cinema cameras, the more you pay, the more, unless you're an expert, the camera can get in the way, because the more you're bombarded by the different codecs, the different
Yeah,
file formats, bit rates, frame rates, resolutions. It's an absolute maze.
yeah,
Even experts have to spend some time figuring out the settings they need. Then they
uh,
kind of probably set up a custom mode and disregard the rest. But for somebody just starting filmmaking,
yeah,
filmmaking's got challenges of its own. You don't
yeah,
need all this other stuff
yeah,
getting in the way and confusing you. So
yeah,
there's time enough for shooting raw and shooting log and experimenting with all these
yeah.
different frame rates and speed
And
ramping and all that. There's time enough for that when you need it. You don't if you don't need
absolutely.
it, don't do it.
Yep. And
Yeah.
just enough time to say hi to a few people, and I think that some people
Yeah.
are starting to populate in now. So hi
All
Steve,
over
hi
the world.
Carl, Mark,
We're,
Chris.
we're international. I can't
We
believe
are
it.
international, yeah, indeed. And so yeah, that's absolutely right. And don't forget, in a commercial environment, like for instance, infinite like movie making, filmmakings, you know, they may have these expensive cine cameras, and don't forget they have actually a team of people
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to look into specification or the setting
Yeah.
for that specific scene. It's not actually the cameraman who's doing it. Everything is predetermined for them. They have the DP there, you know, and who determine all the lighting angles and everything like that, the aesthetics, and everything is predetermined. The cameraman is really just the operator. And then they also have a second camera who do the focusing. You know, they actually have a
Yeah.
huge team of people doing individual job. Every
Yeah.
single element that a lot of you know, commercial like smaller productions people like myself, you know, we have to do everything ourselves. We look at the camera setting, we have to set the correct codec, for instance, and frame rate to determine certain things we would like to see. But in the, you know, really bigger production, you don't need to even do that. You know, you have a bunch of people doing separate things, and in a way, in photography, similar thing. If you go to big studio houses, you know, they have people looking to lighting angles. I mean, obviously the
Yeah.
main photographer will still have a final say to certain things, but a lot of the time when you go to a studio environment, if you see these commercial shoots going on, they also have a bunch of people working. One will do the
Yeah.
reflectors, one will do the main light, key light, second, third lights, you
Yeah.
know, different angles. Then the photographer will do a test shots and determine whether this in the movement maybe just a little bit more and things like that. And so it's really different in when it comes to the actual real world usage compared to, you know, the day-to-day enthusiasts and camera enthusiasts going around shooting around in of the world at the moment. And I think that and the more you look into it, the more you realize that sometimes things that, you know, Rod and I say, you know, in this live chat may not make sense because you know, yeah, we think 8 megapixels is more than enough, you know, oh no, why, you know, everything is 40 plus now, you know, you don't need 8 megapixel and things like that. But the thing is, do you really need that? Do I need to submit work at, you know, at 40 megapixel? Not really. And but that's obviously something we can talk a little bit about later. So let's kick off with today's main topics first, and we can just kind of spin off on it and based on what everybody thinks. But first question to everyone who's listening right now is that is everyone here listening right now have more than one system? That's what I want to find out first. You know, like, do you have just, when I say system, I would say format. Do you have multiple formats that you use? Micro Four Thirds, full frame, APS-C, medium format. Let us know how many formats you use, and also whether you do use maybe 2 formats at any one time or things like that, or you just shoot exclusively one format and then you move on to a different format if you need to, you know, to do something else.
Four,
Ross saying
four,
4.
four.
So
I'm getting
basically,
my hands in the right place. There we go.
you
4.
you have everything then.
I don't. I don't. I'm not. I'm not shooting APS-C at the moment.
Oh, so what's 4 then? You got Micro Four Third,
Well,
APS-C.
phone.
Oh, phone.
So
Yes, yes.
so if I think the phones are underrated. If you need to get footage of yourself doing
Yep.
something,
Yep.
and if you need to do very stable, steady
Yep.
panning shots or camera movements,
Yep.
or if you've got one of these little gadgets like a turntable
Yep.
or
Yep.
a
Yep.
spinner or a little what's the word I'm looking for, slider
Yep.
or a gimbal, phones are very easy to operate on these things, and you can get some very interesting camera movements without lugging around
Yeah,
a truckload of gear.
that's true.
Um, MFT we know about. How did I get 4? Oh, I've got my Fujifilm X30 out. I don't rule out smaller format cameras. So
Mm.
I think action cameras like GoPros or better quality compact cameras,
Yep.
um, they have their place, because like my little X30 can't compete with MFT for quality
Yep.
really,
Yep.
but it's got a 4x zoom, great
Yep.
stabilization, and I can
Mm-hmm.
put it in a little camera pouch and carry it
Right.
around, and it's job done. So that has its place.
Mm.
And then you might say at the top of the tree, I like full frame stuff, but it's actually for my own enjoyment, not because I
Yep.
need it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that the difference between shooting, taking pictures for yourself and doing it for a living,
Yep.
I think it's quite surprising when you do it for yourself. If one thing is better than another thing, you want the better thing, don't you? If you can
Yeah. Of
get
course.
40 megapixels, you'd rather have that than 30,
Yep.
etc.
Yep.
But with professional photography, good enough is actually good enough.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
if the client, if you don't have to give the client something better than they want, because
No.
that's going to cost you more money.
Yep.
And there are times when using a more advanced or a larger format camera will get in the way of giving
Yep.
the client what they want,
Yep.
because it won't be quite as effective as a
Yep.
smaller format.
I totally agree. I think I'll give you a very quick example. You know, what you said just totally makes sense to me. And, you know, like from a client's perspective, you know, they're going to give you a budget. You know, they could basically, you agree to
Yeah,
the budget,
yeah,
and that's how much you're going to get paid for your job, right? So
yeah,
if they usually every job that I have, whether in stills or in video terms, they will give you like what sort of resolutions they want me to produce, and
yeah,
so that's the specification they give me. So yeah, you're quite right there. If a client asks me to produce a video for online usage, so like basically they only want 1080 full HD content, or in stills term, if they only need 10 megapixel, for instance, only headshots for websites. So if I have 100 megapixel cameras, so like, you know, all these things that are nicing extras is completely useless, because I have to render it down to produce a work that is you can't even see the difference when using slightly cropped format or even cheaper cameras in that instance. And so you have to just kind of bear that in mind with that.
it might actually be worse than useless if it doesn't stabilize as well, or doesn't have the same frame rate,
No.
or the same buffer capacity, or the same video capabilities.
Yeah.
Sometimes what might appear to be a lesser specified camera is better in ways that are
Yeah.
actually more important.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting. Just looking at all these people. Thank you for contributing the answers here. We got a lot of responses here straight away. Many of
Mm.
you use more than just one format, but also many of you, surprisingly, you know, like a lot of using a 35mm film. So like, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
interesting. That's very interesting. So that something we can definitely talk about, because I love 35mm film. I'm not sure, Rod, do you still shoot film?
I don't, but it's mainly time and practicality, 'cause it's quite difficult to get. Never
Mm,
mind that it's quite expensive, and then you've got to find somewhere to get it developed. But I'm going to throw a question out there for all these people who still shoot film. I think I know what they're going to say. Are there any digital simulations that actually come at all close to what the film looks like? Now, I've never been able to get
No.
close with any kind of profiles or LUTs or editing to the actual look of Fuji Velvia or my all-time fave Kodachrome 25. There are lots of presets and profiles and LUTs that say, oh, it's Kodachrome 25. No, they're not. They're not. The only thing that looks like Kodachrome 25 is Kodachrome 25.
It
And I
is.
just wonder if that's what other people feel.
Yeah, I would like to think I would like to hear from you guys as well, and because Rod and I actually had some discussion before outside of this chat, and talking about film simulations. You know, there are a ton of you know, obviously Fujifilm is very famed for their internal film simulation mode that you can select and mimic basically all the old Fujifilm look. But you can also buy third-party software that you can install in computers and simulate them in post. DxO has Film Pack. Nick also has some kind of analog effects pro, which is kind of also emulate a lot of the analog look. There are other presets like Visco and all the other things you can buy, and you know, options are basically unlimited online these days. You can find a ton of things that will give you a look, but any of those look closer to what you know, if you're film users, then you would kind of know what I'm going to say. Yeah, how close they are, you know, between the real film and the actual digital converted look, and yeah, that would be a very interesting thing. So before we gonna expand to what you guys have responded, and let's talk a little bit about my kind of topic today. It's not really clickbait because I actually did hear this from 3 separate videos that I watched over the last couple of weeks. These 3 videos are made by 3 independent filmmakers and commercial videographers. They all say the same thing differently, but is along the same line. So they all say that Michael Four Third is now in their portfolio for some certain type of commercial jobs, and what actually shocked me, because I never would have thought from these guys they would say such a thing. But then they explained it in their videos that because apparently towards the middle of 2022 and into 2023, there has been an increasing number of commercial agencies and now asking commercial videographers and filmmakers to produce vertical contents that can mimic the aesthetic of a smartphone. I know it sounds a little confusing there, and but you now have because the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. Because you see that a lot of advertising these days, especially online environment, you through YouTube advert and all the other adverts that you see online, you see a lot of kind of smartphone lookalike footage, you know, shoot vertically, you know, almost like mimicking TikTok and YouTube Reels and whatnot, you know, any sort of vertical videos that they almost look like they're shot with a smartphone. But if you look closer, they definitely have a high quality look to it, and that is actually exactly my point here. And these 3 guys explain it exactly the same thing. So these agencies don't want smartphone footage, but they want smartphone looking footage, but in a more commercial or more high-end looking footage. And Rod and I just both talked about a little bit about that as well. So we both agree that full frame can't get you that, because the inherent shallow depth of field, even if you stop all the way down to f11, f16, you just can't get the same depth of field you get from a Micro Four Third, which is the closest thing you can get to a smartphone look, while maintaining all the dynamic range and all the you know, kind of slightly high-end look to it. And so this has suddenly become a norm apparently, and they said they've been getting requests left, right and center from different agencies and producing vertical content that basically give you a smartphone aesthetic for whatever content they're creating, mostly for brand, travel, and things like that. Travel especially, I think travel is actually something that has been requesting a lot about vertical videos, so they can kind of green screen a key into the actual content to show, you know, on a phone, and during you know, a person holding a phone and looking into a distance, you know, very nice surrounding and so forth. So that's quite interesting. So have you ever heard about that, Rod? Something like this.
I haven't. That is quite interesting, but I guess we shouldn't be too surprised, because for a long time there has been this kind of fashion. Do you remember the term gonzo journalism? So it's this kind of idea that 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 you don't have to be intellectual or educated
Yep.
or skilled.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
have to be ordinary. It's like celebrating the ordinary. And I think
Mm.
this is just one aspect of it. It's like all those TV crime dramas where you always have to have a
Yeah.
bit of shaky handheld footage
Yeah.
following
Yeah. Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
running
Yeah.
up the stairs or down a
Yep.
corridor. I mean, technically, it's dreadful, but it kind of evokes this
The
kind of
realism.
urgent slapdash
Yep. Yeah.
make do videography, and
Yeah.
it's a style. And I think in some ways, trying to reproduce the look of film is the same thing, because compared to digital, it's obviously imperfect, but maybe
Yeah.
imperfect is what we want.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting thing as well. And now you mention it, I know it's slightly sidetracked a little bit, but I think that a lot of the digital creators and digital filmmakers, cinematographers, especially those who are younger than we are, and and who are brought up and with all these digital evolutions over the last 10 years, and I think that it's now coming around in circle. I also saw another few videos talking about the trend in terms of video and photography look in 2023, is that a lot of the photographers and also video creators are considering the sharpening their images and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
post, and that is not actually not the first not not something that fresh to me. And because even in Hollywood, I'm not sure how many of you actually know that the many feature films that you see these days, they most of them are shot with 8K videos, 8K and 6K cameras, and they actually use in digital post productions. They actually de-sharpen the images so they can look a little bit more organic, less digital and less kind of clinical look, so they can kind of mimic to the more how human eyes see things. Because a lot of the time when you look at some digital images, especially those high resolution cameras, you find them they're just a little bit too sharp to to the eye. It's not, doesn't look quite natural.
Yeah,
And this is also why a lot of filter companies now they're introducing mist filters and things, just everything
yeah,
just trying
yeah.
to blur your images. So in a way, is our camera manufacturer doing maybe just a bit too much for what we need these days? Now we went through the resolution race, over the last 10 years, and going from 8 to 10 to 12, 16, 24, 40, 60. Now like God knows what's the higher megapixels now, maybe 100. And so like are they just being too much now? People are now de-sharpening the images because they look too sharp. And then I just don't know exactly what's going on around the world, but certainly from a lot of filmmakers out there, they all say the same thing. They need as of 2023 now, people are starting to go back a little bit, step back a little bit, looking at what they create in the past 2 years, thinking that look maybe just a little bit too digital. Now they want to revert back, so to make their content look a little bit more natural, a bit more film-like, a bit more analog-like. And so it's going around in circle at the moment. And how many of you will agree what I just said? Because if some of you are photographers or filmmakers, let me know your comments in the comment section, and let me know about whether you use any mist filters, or you sharpen your images just because you want to look a little bit more natural, and then use film simulation. That's another thing.
I think if you whether you do this for a living or for yourself,
Yeah.
everyone wants to find a signature look, don't they? And I
Mm.
think I think right now everyone likes the organic look, as you just described it.
Yeah.
We what we don't create stuff as a technical record. We create it as a kind of we want to get an emotional response as well, and to evoke an atmosphere.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with a strictly accurate digital rendition much of the
Mm.
time. So I think that's got something to do with it. But I think we've kind of answered our own question here when you say who needs a 100 megapixel camera? So like the Fujifilm GFX 100S. Mostly you don't, but occasionally it'll be the only camera that will do.
Yeah.
So if you want a particularly organic style of filmmaking, you wouldn't use that camera. You'd
No.
use something quite different. But if you want to produce giant advertising images for a very affluent client, you will use what they tell you, and that will almost certainly be medium format.
Yeah.
And this might be one of those cases where the client says what they want and you have to do it. So I I've spoken to filmmakers who've had briefs from big agencies who say,
Yep.
can you do this, this, and this? Yes. Oh, by the way, you have to shoot it on Canon C302s. Oh, do I? Yes, you do. Yeah, because that's what we want. And it can just come around. It can come around that way because particularly
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
particularly with filmmaking, you're going to be working alongside teams
Yep.
that like a
Yep.
very particular workflow with very particular equipment. Not
Yeah.
so much with stills photographers, but certainly in filmmaking, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing about, aside from resolution that we just talked about, another thing is about stabilization. We all know that, digital cameras, especially from consumer cameras point of view, all of them now has really great Ibis, especially Michael Four Third, of course, because sensor size and whatnot.
Yeah.
And but now I found, especially if anyone is a Netflix subscribers watching some of the latest Netflix drama series, I don't know how many of you actually pay attention to it. I don't know whether because these days is part of my job to make videos, and I'm starting to pay a lot more attention to how people film stuff or edit stuff at least. And then so some of these Netflix series that you watch, you can actually see the footage itself is stabilized, but then they edit the camera shake in post, which looks awful. Looks absolutely awful. If you want camera shake in the first place, then you either dial down the stabilization or use a slightly different method to hold the camera, not really completely stabilize it, and then you add more shake in post. It just looks weird. It's almost looking like a TV being moved left and right, and kind of like shaky movement, so it just doesn't look
Yeah.
natural to me, and you lose that kind of perspective, the distance and everything like that, so it's all look a bit odd to me. So this is, and again, it's down to what we're really trying to say about today is that getting the right job, getting the right gear for the right job. And if we need certain thing for certain look, you go for that gear, not not trying to do everything digitally manipulated in post and do things like that. And otherwise, first of all, you're wasting resources, and secondly, you're actually adding more work in post because you want to go for a certain look, but then you use the wrong gear in the first place. And
Yeah.
that way, I think that not only you're wasting money, potentially if you've only using one or two cameras, but then you're increasing the production hours that you needed to edit those stuff, and so that means that you are wasting your time and money eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you need to be able to shoot, I know we're talking about video a lot, but if you need to be able to shoot video handheld reliably on the fly and have it look quite smooth,
Yep.
you've got to think about the right camera to do that with. And I mean, I think this does go a lot with sensor size. The smaller the sensor,
Yep.
the better the stabilization in my experience. And so if you're going to be shooting ad hoc handheld, you don't know what you're going to be filming or the circumstances,
Yep.
you need to rely quite heavily on the stabilization. So
Yep.
you would choose the camera that has the stabilization that you need. You don't necessarily need 8K or 6K open gate filming or RAW over HDMI to an external recorder, all of that. What you actually need is much more basic, something
Yep.
that will give you stable footage in difficult conditions every time.
Yep.
And that's a case of choosing the right camera for the job, I think.
Yes, indeed, and also like go back to the argument you're saying about the Fujifilm 100S. If the time you needed the resolution, that will be the only camera you can do it, then
Yeah,
you go for
yeah,
that camera. But if
yeah,
majority of time I mean, I'm talking about in commercial sense. If you only need to submit works that's like less than 30 megapixel, then there really isn't a point to get 100 megapixel cameras. And not only you increasing your workflow, you need more storage, and you need a more powerful computers, and and to process all those files in time. And so all those are elements that they're I think it's more affecting the commercial side more than in more like private individuals or photo enthusiasts who doesn't generate a lot
Yeah.
of quantity in terms of photos or videos, because in a commercial environment time is money, so we need to turn
Yeah.
around jobs very quickly. We process a lot of photos at a time, a lot of videos at a time, and so like every little thing helps. So like if we can keep the resolutions that we need, uh, you know, we don't want to go over it simply because the system, the time, everything's tailored for that kind of resolution. So we know exactly how we churn out 500 photos in whatever 25 megapixels, or how many videos I can decode or sorry render for 4K. For 10 minutes, we all kind of calculate that into our account, so we know exactly what we're doing. So if suddenly I shoot everything 8K, and I got an 8K camera, but I was still producing 4K work. And imagine the amount of storage I need and the amount of computer power I need to process all those stuff. It means that it would take longer to render. Everything basically take longer, more expensive, bigger, and whatnot. So it just may not work in a commercial environment, and that's why a lot of commercial people who are actually using camera to make money, which is very different to what you may hear from YouTube. Because the YouTubers
Mm,
and
mm.
influencers, they have very different take on cameras. They're looking at specs. They obviously it's good. You learn about the specs and things like that. That means you get informed decisions whether you want to get the gear or not. But quite a lot of the time, they over exaggerate certain features,
Yeah.
and that totally unnecessary. Because when you are actually starting to work and earn money from with camera, then you finally realize a lot of these cameras are definitely over the top that you don't need, and you may want to actually step back a little bit, think about exactly what you need to for your work, and not overspending it. You rather spend the money in getting another nice lens, for instance, or maybe invest in education, maybe invest in other props and gears that you may need for your jobs, whether it's going to be stills or photography. Don't forget, camera, whether it's stills or videos, you need a lot more than just the camera. You need lights, you need reflectors, you need a lot of things, all kinds of stuff that you may need, and you've ended up spending a lot of money outside of the camera. So don't spend everything in the camera. Think about exactly what you need, your requirement as a photographer or filmmakers, and don't overdo it, and because otherwise you are really going to basically stretching your finances, or maybe even wasting it, and if you're not using any of those features in the future.
I think as well that that doesn't just apply to resolution. It applies to the format as well, because we all seem to have this notion that the bigger the format, the better, but it
Mm,
but it brings its own problems, and particularly the weight and the cost of larger format gear, but
yep,
also there are in some technical respects it's actually inferior to a smaller format. And the ones I particularly we talked about when we talked about stabilization,
yep,
but there's also depth of field. We're in the middle of this kind of fashion for shallow depth of field, but that's not always. It's not always what you want.
yeah,
Um, so the argument is that the full frame or medium format will give you much shallower depth of field than say MFT. That's true. Uh, but for those times when you actually want depth of field, you can't get it
mm,
because you're working with longer focal lengths, which, as we know, means shallower depth of field. So I was explaining this to you before we started, Jimmy. I've got a couple of full frame systems with 50mm lenses. The
yep,
idea of the nifty 50 is, you can just walk around this average angle of view, and you would think, wouldn't you? Oh, you want more depth of field? You wind down the aperture. Or you want less depth of field, you open it up. Well, you can certainly do the less depth of field, but even if you stop a 50mm lens right down in full frame, you just can't quite get enough sometimes. So you won't get a foreground and a background sharp at any aperture. You can
yep,
stop right down to f16, and the background won't be quite as unsharp as it was before. But
Yep.
you can quite easily see that it's not fully sharp. So very often a problem with the larger format is
Yep.
that you can't get depth of field.
No.
And this can be it's kind of an issue for macro photography, but it's an issue as well for street and travel photography.
Mm.
If you're constantly battling against limited depth of field, it doesn't just slow you down, it restricts your shutter speeds and the ISO settings you use. It's quite a real sense of freedom on MFT to go around with the lens set to f4 and not have to worry
Yep.
about the depth of field. You can
Yep.
just shoot. So yes, it's harder to get that shallow look, but
Yep.
it's so much easier to get enough depth of field for all those other times than it
Yep.
is for the larger format.
That's absolutely. I mean, I think that if any of you here photograph a landscape, you probably know that if you shoot a larger format cameras, whether they're going to be full frame or medium format, you know that,
Yeah,
that depending what sort of scene or what sort of lenses you use, but you probably quite often find yourself have to photo stack them,
yeah,
foreground,
yeah,
midground, and background to get everything sharp. But in a smaller format, any crop APS-C or better still, Micro Four Third, even they may have less megapixel counts, but you are very much easier to get a full sharp
yeah,
edge to edge sharpness all the way from closest to or to infinity just by stopping down the lens to f8, and that's it.
yeah, yeah,
Everything
yeah.
will be, you don't even need to focus stackers, everything will be sharp. And yeah,
It's like that advice in magazines for landscapes, isn't it?
yeah.
Always include some foreground interest. Well, good luck getting that sharp and your landscape.
Yep, yep.
That's the difficult thing.
And you hear a lot, isn't it? All the full frame or larger format landscape photography have to focus stack them, just
Yeah,
to get three
yeah,
images and so they can process it in post. But that's obviously down to individuals' needs. If you really need
yeah, yeah,
high resolutions, and if you don't mind the trouble of going through the photo stacking stage in post, that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong answers here. But what we're suggesting here
no.
is still getting the right job. And again, I keep saying getting the right job, getting the right gear
The
for the
right
right job.
camera for the job. Yeah,
And so and it's not a debate about resolutions or what is good or bad
no,
or whether
no,
full frame is going to be like the camera choice or everything. We're not even suggesting Micro Four Thirty is better than the others. It's only about like looking at the right format for whatever you're using, and also in specifications and the features, and whether you do need all this fancy stuff that you may be looking at. For instance, a lot of people did say that oh, I photographed this and that, but there's no and I don't need eye focus or animal focus and kind of thing, like recognitions. They mean nothing to you. So in that case, a lot of the these higher end cameras probably will become less of a kind of like an enticing attraction to these particular photographers. So I think this is quite an interesting discussions here. So I'm just looking at a lot of comments right here, right now, and it's quite interesting. So thank you all for contributing all these comments here. Let's scroll back a little bit and see what I can find in here. A couple of them is actually quite interesting. Carl, I agree with you. Rod, he said, and there's no, they don't look like film basically. But talk about the film simulations.
yeah. There's lots of factors in how film looks
Yep.
beyond just adding a bit of grain and shifting the colors. There's a bit more to it than that. It's the tonality of the whole thing. They've often got some slightly subtle vignetting. There are too many factors for just
Yeah.
simple presets.
Yep.
And I think as well that if there are any Fujifilm users out there, please don't shoot me down because I've been one in the past. Fujifilm's Velvia and Provia in-camera film simulations, well, they're not. They have something of the intention of those films, but they're not
Yep.
the same.
And
The Fujifilm's Velvia simulation is, I find, quite sickly and overdone. It's not like the film. But anyway, that's just me.
But but many of you actually don't even know either. And any film stocks that you buy, if those who shoot film, and you may recognize in the packet itself, or even on the little canister, the actual roll itself, there are a couple of markings there. Right. First of all, is color temperature. and then you know, ISO settings obviously one of them. So like they are designed to represent a you know, the white and the grays in that particular temperature. So anything off to that, whether it's going to be high or lower, will starting to show color cast. So this is exactly why I think the main reason the digital simulations never look right, because we now set our own color balance in digital terms, and which is very different to the actual physical chemical that reacts to light, and because they are designed and set to react to certain temperature when the light condition is there, and so this is how they all look different. I've never tried it myself because I don't use Fujifilms, and it's going to be really hard to emulate or a situation where I can actually do a more consistent kind of side-by-side test between two film stocks, so it's natural film stock against digital simulations. And plus, a lot of the film stock is virtually unavailable these days, so it's really quite hard to tell. But all I know is that from my experience and looking at film simulations in post is that because we now set the color temperatures ourselves, is often going to be very different to how the actual film itself react to light at a certain temperature. So that's why they all look weird. And then to me, like I use it. I do use some film simulation to get a base first, and then I could work on it a little bit. But I would not just go for it because I want a Kodak Chrome look, or I want a you know, Fuji Rila look, you know, whatever. You know, they never look right. And but
No, no.
I'll use it as a base, and then I tweak a little bit, you know, like in a curve and everything like that, just to make it to my taste really. And because it's
Yeah,
always quite good to have a little base first to start me off, and then I'm just gonna
yeah.
tweak it a little bit rather than start from scratch. Okay. Um, and
So
Eugene
like
also is quite interesting.
Eugene's,
Yeah, sorry.
is yeah, two things Eugene has said. Even though carpenter has many types of hammers, yeah, I'm going to use that one, Eugene. Thank you very much. Um, and as he says, a lot of broadcasts are still using very small sensors. He mentions 2/3 of an inch sensors and
Yep.
makes a very good point. When you've got a footballer coming you at full speed with a whacking great zoom on the camera, um, you if even if you had the world's best eye tracking AF, I think probably you'd rather just have a bit more leeway in depth of field, so that
Yep.
if the focusing does go, it's still your footballer is still sharp.
Yes.
Um, but the thing with eye tracking, animal tracking, face, body, dog, cat, aeroplane tracking is it's only become it's being put forward as it's kind of a miraculous new technology, but really it's only really necessary because there isn't any depth of field or not very
Mm.
much. So if you want to use not medium format, want to use full frame and very fast lenses, it has made this kind of tech necessary. On smaller formats, I'm not quite so sure it's as necessary.
Mm.
So it sounds like cutting edge autofocus tech, but are we creating a problem by insisting on these larger format cameras?
Mm.
They're
That's
controversial. I don't even know
I.
whether I mean that, but you know what I'm saying though. I think
Well,
if no nobody ever worries about focusing with a phone. You just
no,
film and shoot, and it works out fine.
because phone has so much depth of field to play with in the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that is kind of having the right tool for the job. If you're doing some kind of if you're doing some social filming, maybe at a wedding, you're in the middle of a disco or middle of a crowd or something.
Yep.
There's no room. You've got to keep moving. You're being jostled. You don't need the extra worry of focusing.
Yeah.
It's hard enough filming the thing without
Yeah.
getting caught up with that.
And absolutely, and I think you're right there. I mean, I filmed some weddings, and really not my main thing, but then filming weddings, you often find that if you have too much shallow depth of field going on, is always very challenging in a very in
Yeah,
constant moving environment.
yeah,
Everybody's moving all the time, and you'll find yourself a hard time trying to make something make sense, if you know what I mean. And filming is very different to photography, and even though we share a lot of fundamentals, exposures and framing and things like that, it's very similar in that way. But in terms of storytellings and how you angle it and racking focus from one point to another can dramatically change the narrative of the entire film. And but because of that, like having autofocus, shallow depth of field in a constantly moving environment is not ideal. And this is also why a lot of documentary series and documentary films are using wide lens and deep depth of field settings, and most of them are actually shooting at smaller sensors, like we just mentioned, because you get more depth of field. It's more forgiving when it comes to focusing, and so you can follow a subject moving around and without losing sharpness. So you can basically still tell the story very easily. You can follow the subject around, even though with lots of people going around, and you're not going to lose focus of him. And it's all really down to how you use the gear at the end of the day. And even if you use full frame, and you may want to stop it right down to f8 and things like that, using a wider lens to get slightly deeper depth of field to achieve that sort of look. And the only time that you may want to have a shallow depth of field situations in filming is probably when the person is static, when it's kind of staying still and doing talking and things like that. So yeah, that's that you just have to kind of bear that in mind when it comes to that sort of environment. Yeah, that's all good. So let me just see if there's another comment here. Oh, Corey just joined. Hello, Corey, and this one of our regular. Okay.
I think it's at work. I think it's at work. Yeah, get back to work, Corey.
Go back to it. Eugene also consistent that actually the next comment, and that's why we're in live broadcasting, still live in the A world oh, that's what you said, isn't it, early just now?
Yeah.
Okay, and let's. Oh, hang on, Chris. Oh, Chris, hello. Oh, people are joining right now. That's okay. You missed the whole chunk of it. That's okay. You can stream back. Remember, this is all stream on demand here, so you can always stream back to what we discussed so far. And it's a very interesting topic today. It's all about how I newly found out this year in 2023, a lot of commercial filmmakers and commercial videographers are getting jobs requirements from commercial agencies, and asking them to produce content with Micro Four Thirds cameras specifically, only because they wanted contents generated to mimic a smartphone aesthetic without going too much full frameness, or can I use that word, full frameness, and basically less more depth of field, so it looks better quality than a stock iPhone or whatever smartphone footage, but definitely looks more high end, and they wanted that look. But the only way to achieve it is basically using a Micro Four Thirds cameras. And that's how we started the whole conversation today. And it's not really trying to promote Micro Four Thirds, but it's more so about, getting the right gear for the right jobs. And because now obviously there's a requirement, and you satisfy the requirements. And the reason why behind that requirement is because they want certain thing. And this is why we started the whole conversation today. At the end of the day, it really depends on what sort of photographer or filmmaker you are and what sort of content you generate. And then you make your own decision whether you can use one system for live, or you were going to have mix and match different system to for different jobs or different scenarios. And we also asked the question from everybody that how many of you use more than one system. Quite a few of you actually said that like you use 2 to 3 systems, which is not uncommon. I have, even though I'm primarily a Micro Four Thirds, but then I also have full frame and APS-C now, so like I have multiple systems in my arsenal here, so I can use different thing for different times. And Rod obviously has way more than I do, and and then he operates literally every format and that. So that's all good. There's no right or wrong answers here, so we're all happy. And I think what's more important at the end of the day, if you're a professional, what gets you for the payment, that's what important. That's the most important thing, and just don't overdo it. For private individuals, whatever makes you happy. I think that's the main thing. If you're happy using Micro Four Thirds, using full frame, using APS-C, medium format, whatever results that you want to get, you get it from the gear that you have, and you're happy about them. That's what matters.
I think it's often the physical characteristics that are important too. I mean, we talk a lot about resolution, sensor size,
Yep.
noise, and all sorts of other things. But for me, the kind of stuff I do if I'm illustrating articles for a magazine,
Yep.
the things I absolutely have to have, apart from image quality good enough, is I need to have reliable stabilization,
Mm.
and I need to have lenses that are going to be sharp from edge to edge. I don't want to have to spend half my life in Lightroom or Capture One fiddling with images or DxO to
Yep.
correct
Yep.
lenses that aren't very good. But for me, the stabilization is a big thing, because you cannot go back to a client and say, yeah, sorry, they're not sharp, but it's 50 million pixels. You can't complain. Well, they will. They will. They don't care if it's 50 or 5. It had to be sharp.
No. Yep.
So,
Yep.
it's there's a lot of factors. And so for me, the stabilization on MFT is so bulletproof. It's just my go-to camera for any kind of professional work where I need a certain quality of image reliably. If I'm
Mm.
messing around for my own interest, or doing a project that might turn into a tutorial,
Yep.
full frame is fine. But I find it less reliable when you're just doing kind of any kind of run and gun work where you haven't got time to mess about. You
No.
just need to get shooting
Just
and
just
get
to
the
give
shot.
the audience some idea, because you do produce commercial work for magazines and websites and things like that. So like
Yeah.
talk us through
So,
about like what the requirement is when it comes to like generate photos or video samples for them.
well, so if I'm doing a tutorial on how to do something with the camera, because that's much of my job, I would need to get shots of a camera being used, the settings on the back of the camera, um, somebody shooting with a camera, and that's just one type of work. Another type of work might be how to shoot in low light. So if you're going to show people how to shoot in low light, you'd better come back with images that are actually sharp.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've kind of undermined the whole thing. So I do two types of thing. One of which is illustrating articles by photographing gear. Another is photographing things to illustrate specific techniques. Now, unless the magazine or website says you have to use this camera, which does happen sometimes,
Yep.
I would always use MFT, because my shots of cameras and people doing stuff,
Yep.
I don't need to worry about sharpness, because as long as I've got half an hour on the shutter speed, the stabilization will always save my bacon. I can rely on it. And I don't have to worry too much about depth of field, because generally f4, f5.6 is just about right. So the whole of the camera's sharp, but the background's slightly gone. So it's a kind of sweet spot for me for depth of field as well.
Yep.
And it's those two things really. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
resolution is more than adequate, because I tend to downsample what I shoot anyway for mags and websites. But it's just reliability, consistency, and dependability, not in the physical cameras themselves,
No.
but in terms of the results. I know
Yep.
what I'm going to get, and I get it every time, which I don't get with larger formats. With
Mm.
full frame, not so much, particularly the stabilization.
Interesting. But in your work, in your line of work, so you resolution is not really a priority because you don't really need it, do you?
So if it's for the web, I will typically downsample 20 megapixels down to the equivalent of 4K UHD. So that's 3840 by 2160.
It's about 8
So it's
megapixels
probably,
in 4K. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And even that is really a bit too much for the website. And most website content management systems will automatically scale that image down again to suit the image dimensions of
Yep.
that
Yep.
website's
Yep.
things, because no website publisher
No.
wants people to wait for a larger image to load if they can give them a smaller one.
Yeah. Well, that
And
that that's interesting.
for magazines, 12, 12 megapixels is generally plenty.
Yeah.
I unfortunately do not have the kind of status whereby one of my images will be a DPS, but occasionally it might be a full A4 page or letter size in the US,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
might be half a page. 12 megapixels is fine. So I might myself like 40, 60 or 100 megapixels for my own satisfaction, but for what I do for a living is just
Yeah.
unnecessary,
Yeah. So
sadly.
that's basically a prime example of what we basically discussed throughout the entire chat today. And yeah, it's similar in my line of work. You know, like I mentioned before, my agency work, which basically make the bulk of my money, is the limit was 20 megapixels, but recently they are considering upping that, so that means I may have to get a camera that is over 20. But even then, I don't need 40, 50, 60s and things like that, you know, and those are definitely not in anywhere near in the near futures. I don't think they're going to go for that high. I think at max they're going to go for 10 to maybe 15% increase from current 20 megapixel. That means 24 should be more than sufficient. And so that's interesting. Anthony has a comment about OM system, and just kind of in line with what we've been talking as well, and about Megapixel. We discussed this last week, and about OM systems. We can certainly talk a little bit about that, and whether they should increase. I don't know, in a way that I think that they are in the sweet spots at the moment for most photographers, I would say. And but depending on whether they want to move forward with, first of all, there are two ways of looking at it. First of all, if they are really wanted more professional users. Well, first of all, I know that their OM1 is aiming for professional photographers, and 20 megapixels is okay for certain type of work, and myself included. But like I said, my agency may be changing the policies and also specifications. That means that I will need more than 20, and that means OM1 may not actually suitable for me in the near futures. And secondly, if OM system does think about video a little bit more seriously, and they may want to start thinking about going higher resolution, only because they can generate maybe like just like Panasonic does 5.7K, 6K videos in that kind of regions, and that means their 20 megapixels is definitely not enough to generate that kind of resolutions, and so I think it depends on whether they would want these two areas to be implemented in their portfolio, and if they do, and especially from the professional side of it, and they then, yes, very likely they will have to introduce a high resolution sensor. And I think even for future proofing, and even from the consumer perspective and also perception, and it may be also just doing it just for show in a way. When I say for show, it's because that most manufacturers now are doing cameras that are higher than 20, and 20 is almost like kind of low, in the low end, even though we keep discussing about resolutions being more than sufficient. Like Rod's work is basically 8 megapixels enough for him. And then so he doesn't
Well,
need any
it's
more than 8.
it's it's not enough for me, but it's enough for the people I work for.
Yeah,
Can I put it
yeah,
that way?
yeah. And but anyway, so that the gist that we're trying to say here. And I think that it should be quite interesting to see whether OM system will go for the high resolution, but I think they will at some point, because I don't think they can avoid that eventually, simply because almost everybody else has more than 20 nowadays, and I just
It's
think
it's
that they may have to go with the flow, I think.
it's a matter of perception and credibility, isn't it? Whether or not you need it, that's not the
Yeah.
point. The point is whether the customers and the industry feel that it's time for a change. It just gives people more confidence if they
Mm.
feel that the development is continuing.
Yes.
Rightly or wrongly, it's just how it appears.
Yeah.
So I think probably they do need to do something. I saw in the comments, Carl made an interesting point about wildlife, where that
Okay.
wildlife magazines wanted the aesthetic of a larger format, which I can quite understand, because I think that is quite a fashion or quite a theme with wildlife photography.
Mm.
People like that hyper separated look, don't they? Where your subject
Mm.
is razor sharp and the
Yep.
background is almost gone. That is definitely an aesthetic that is popular. So I can understand that. I think that's a very good point as well. That is an example of getting the right tool for the job. If the job is to get that aesthetic,
Yep.
then you've got to go bigger format.
Yep.
with everything that entails.
However, I mean, if I can add to it, is that and there are, because obviously OM system is gunning for all the wildlife categories, and if you go to OM systems Instagrams and things, look at their portfolio, you can actually see a lot of wildlife photography being shot with that aesthetic, but with Micro Four
Yeah,
Thirds sensor.
yeah.
So
I think
I
if you get
guess,
the 300 f4,
yeah.
that's probably going to give you that look, isn't it?
Yeah, but
I
also
would
like
think.
depending on how you choose to shoot the subject, right? And then they you know, like
Yeah,
I know wildlife can be a bit random off because they are wildlife. You can't pose them in a way,
you don't
but
get the
then again,
choice.
yeah, you don't have a choice. But then again, you
No,
know, you find that even the full frame photographers and the full frame wildlife photographer, they do the same thing. They would wait for the moment, wait until or study the movements. They know that, oh, that rock is where the owl always stands on, so they were trying to
yeah,
capture that
yeah,
by waiting for that moment. So they would choose an angle to the way that, you know, there's nothing behind, even though there's a background. The background might be really further away from that rock. That means that it's all playing around with depth of field at the end of the day and how your focal length works. And you know, if you understand your camera, you know, regardless of format, you can always get similar aesthetic. Okay, it may not be as shallow or may not be as blur as the full frame equivalent, but you can work at it. You know, you can work the composition, you can work your distance, you can work with your focal length and aperture settings. You can always create very, very similar look in a way. And but yeah, if you really want ultra shallow depth of field, you can't deny that larger format will definitely easier and also get you that more consistently, depending whatever the background is, because you are getting shallow depth of field by default. And but it doesn't mean that you can't achieve it with smaller sensors, APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. You can, but you just have to be a little bit more careful about how you're going to achieve that.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Corey's got an issue with the Olympus 75 to 300. I had one of those once. I don't know whether Corey's is better than mine, but mine was pretty dreadful.
I don't think I have used the 75 to
Uh,
300 Mark One before. I may have tested one. I
mm.
don't think I have actually used one. And for my recollections, I don't think I had any problem with that lens at the time when I was using it.
It's just not very sharp
Yeah.
at 300 millimeters. Um, so
o-
I think the consumer lenses are not always a good buy. And the 75 300 magical focal range. What's that? 150 to 600 in
Yeah.
a lens about that big. If
Yeah.
only it's
Yeah.
just a little bit better.
I don't have my
But
f4 lenses here.
I'm
F4 lenses are
I
great.
I'm going to have a quick gripe about stabilization, if I may, and just say that MFT owners don't realize what they've got. So depending on your camera, I'm
Yep.
guessing you're all relying on. I know the figures are higher, the maximum figures are higher, but I guess you're all counting on getting like 3 or 4 stops,
Yeah.
even on
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
day. But
Mm.
well, okay, so I've got this. So I've got an EOS R8 that doesn't have Ibis, but it does have Lens IS, like a lot
Yeah.
of Canon lenses do. You do not get the same consistency across lenses with image stabilization
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
do with a camera that has Ibis. So this lens, this is Canon's 24 to 105, the cheaper STM lens,
Yeah.
variable aperture, and you would think the stabilization in that is not going to be very good. It is extremely good. I'd say you probably get 3 or 4 stops out of that, and that I'd say that's quite rare
Yeah. That's
from
interesting.
inland stabilization. However, I also have this one. This is the retracting 24 to 50 millimeter lens. I'm trying to angle it so you can see, which
Yeah.
also has IS. I reckon I'd probably get about 2 stops out of that. So completely different behavior. It's
Yeah.
and then I also invested in this, which is the RF 35 millimeter f1.8
Yeah.
with IS, and you think, oh, amazing! That's not only fast; it's got stabilization.
Yeah.
I've tried it. I reckon it's probably worth about a stop. So no, I'm sorry to have to say because I spent my
Yeah.
own money,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Canon
When did you expand the system so quickly?
Canon says Canon rates the IS on that lens at up to 5 stops. No,
No. Well, I have to say my own experience. You know, like many of you probably know that I got a Nikon ZFC, which has got no IBIS. So
yeah,
I got
yeah.
the one of the latest ultra wide zoom with the VR on it. I
Oh,
can't
you got
remember.
that, did you? Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the 12 to 35, I think it was. I can't remember
yeah,
exact focal
yeah,
length now. It
yeah.
has VR, full time VR, and I tried to use that lens for vlogging. I would not.
No, no,
It-
no.
the footage came out of it shaking all over the place, even with the VR on. And yeah, it's okay if you do handheld, you know, just like stationary, no movement. But as soon as you start walking or do any kind of walking talk and things like that, no, you can't. You just can't compare with Ibis, and especially with like OM Systems Ibis. It really, I can't vlog with that camera. It's just really hard. And I mean, I don't have any Nikon camera with Ibis, so I can't really confirm what you if you do. If you have both systems kind of working in tandem, like the dual IS that like some other system has, if it does, maybe it's a workable solution. But
I've,
for now, you know that VR lens doesn't give me any usable stabilization
no,
for video. Maybe for stills a little bit, and but even then I wouldn't go as far as doing what OM system can do or Micro Four Thirds in general, like
no.
handheld a shot for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. You know, I'm not gonna do any of those because I don't think I will get a stable stable image for that. It still has some image shakes, so that's
Yeah.
something to share, of course.
So, I mean, all my experience with the Canons just reinforced my feeling that you choose a camera for the job, and if stabilization is what I need,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
MFT. It's MFT. I'm constantly disappointed by what all the others are like.
yeah,
I think Nikon. I've used the Z6 and Z7,
yeah.
not really for video, but for stills, and I'd say
Mm.
that amongst full frame cameras, they are pretty good.
Yeah,
Um, Probably Panasonic too.
yeah.
Sony, I'm less than impressed with,
Mm.
and the only Canon I've used with Ibis is the EOS R6 II, and I thought that was a bit middling. That the results I got were some way off
Yeah,
Canon's
yeah.
claim. So this is why I keep coming back to MFT, where I need reliable stabilization.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think that another confusing thing about modern digital camera manufacture is that they all quoted stops in terms of stabilizations, and
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing figures because you find that if you do, I mean, there are several YouTube videos doing a test like just like that, you know. So they tested the latest crop of cameras with Ibis, and then they all quoted 6 stop or 6.5 stops,
yeah.
and they do side by side comparisons and walking and things like that. And you do realize that even though they quoted the same app stop stabilization, they all look very different. And without a doubt, the smaller the format, the better the IBIS. Even if the same stop stabilization that they quoted by the manufacturers. So a 6.5 stop in Micro Four Thirds will perform way better than a 6.5 stop on a full frame camera. I'm just taking two extremes there, and APS-C kind of sitting in the middle a little bit. And yeah, it's without a doubt. I mean, I think there was a guy called Matthew something. I can't remember that his YouTube channel, and he did a side-by-side comparison with the OM1 against the XT5, which both have similar sort of f-stop IBIS. And he did exactly the same walk and talk and walking around rocky environments. And you can clearly see the footage being more shaky on the APS-C than the MFT. So it's something quite confusing sometimes, you know, even though they all quote the same numbers, but without actually seeing the footage, then you may not realize how effective the IBIS really is.
Yeah, I think there are lots of factors when you start talking about video with stills. I think possibly you can make some claims about um, the stabilization effect, but they are always best case solutions with a certain lens in certain test conditions,
Yeah,
with and stabilization on certain axes only. I can
yeah.
only conclude that never in any of the things I photograph do I meet those conditions because I
No.
never get close to those figures.
It's
But video,
almost like those cars with the MPG, right? You know, the fuel economy. You can never ever get anywhere close to it.
it's exactly like that. Um, but I think video is different. It's a lot more complicated because the number of stops doesn't tell you anything at all,
No.
because the stabilization for stills photography is designed to counteract very rapid, almost instantaneous movements and then stop.
Mm.
With video, that's only half the battle. What you actually want your Ibis to do is
Yep.
not let you move the camera too quickly, and
Yep.
there's only a limited range of movement.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm going to guess that some cameras have Ibis mechanisms with much more a much wider range of movement than others. So that's why some cameras are much better at coping with vlogging, where you're not just suppressing jitters, you're trying to suppress slower, longer movements, aren't you? Like
Mm.
shifting and tilting and stepping up and
Yep.
down.
Yep.
Um, and I think it's whether the IBIS mechanism has the range to cope with that,
Yeah.
and whether it has the algorithms to understand the difference between intentional movements and
Yep. Yep.
accidental movements. So it's how they're programmed as well. And I just think some are programmed a lot better than others.
Okay, okay. It's interesting because Alan just came back to us. Alan took photography. I can imagine manufacturers saying the stop of Ibis are for stills images, not video.
Yeah,
You may be,
that's right. Yeah,
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 you're definitely correct there. But however,
yeah.
what Rod just explained is basically also apply for still photography. For instance, an example is that, like I mentioned earlier, I can use a 12mm micro four thirds lens, which is equivalent to 24 in a full frame, and I don't think anyone can hold a 24mm full frame lens, even with 6-stop stabilization, can hand hold a shot for about 5 seconds. But you can with micro four thirds, even though they both quoted the same number of stops. And this is exactly what Rod was saying. Like the smaller sensor or certain type of Ibis mechanism may allow for longer movement instead of jittery, and that may give you a more usable range of movement when you come to stabilizations. And that's when you can handhold for longer, because your body may naturally sway a little bit, but that movement being counteracted by that particular type of Ibis, while full frame, naturally they have less space to do that sort of thing, so that it may cater for shakes, but not in terms of actual swaying movement, a slightly longer
Well,
movement.
that's the
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? If you're trying to do a 1 second handheld exposure,
Yep.
you're going to need a kind of a stabilizer that can accommodate a long, slow movement. And the manufacturers never tell you any of this stuff and how it works or what have you. I imagine
Yep.
it's commercially sensitive. But I dare say there are some IBIS mechanisms that just don't have that kind of range of movement.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they get to like a little way and say, that's it, I'm out. So I'm sure I've run up against this shooting with a Fujifilm XS10.
Yep.
I think I was shooting a handheld with it just to test its stabilization,
Mm.
and it's fine. I think I mentioned this before, but then it suddenly do like a jump reset and
Yep. Yep.
recenter, as
Yep.
if it said, right, that's as far as I can go, start again. And
Mm.
I think I've seen this on other cameras. So I do think that IBIS mechanisms do have a limited range of travel, but we'll
Yep.
never be told what it is.
Yeah.
But I think that's a factor in how they perform for a handheld video.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think a lot to do with the actual physical design as well, and with full frame bodies getting smaller, and that's, I think that's one of the restrictions on how much movement they can actually allow the design engineers to
Yeah,
to counter the movement. I suppose if full frame cameras are manufacturers decided to, let's make the body bigger, let's give them the best Ibis, and then engineers can have the room to perform, then maybe they can actually come up with similar solutions as a smaller format. And I think at the moment a lot's being driven by size at the moment, and they want the full frame
yeah,
body
I
to
think
be
so.
smaller, and then it's kind of squeezing the available space for the sensor to move around. And even though they now taking priorities of the Ibis to combat shakes more than prolonged movement, like
I think so. Yeah,
more
I
than
think
smaller
that's
camera can. Yeah.
I think that's definitely true. I think that's where the expertise has been developed for stills photography,
Mm.
and I think that shooting video, IBIS for video, is a much more complicated thing. I think that's why so many cameras now have digital IS, which actually
Yes.
works very well. But of course, you
Yes.
get a crop,
Yes.
which isn't ideal.
No.
But maybe one day, camera makers will be able to mount the sensor on something more resembling a gimbal. inside the
Mm.
camera. That
That.
that may solve it, but that would make quite a big camera, I think.
Well, alternate reality just shared his own experience about
Yeah,
his A7R3 is not as impressive as the GX5 in terms of the Ibis. Yeah, I mean we you know I don't think I had to need to debate this. The smaller sensors tends to have better Ibis because of what we just discussed, and it's only superficially, but like I said, what we discussed so far is that you're getting the right tool for the right job. If you really ultimate stabilization is your key for your work, and if you don't need the resolutions, and smaller formats sometimes actually perform better for or to suit your needs better than anything else. Larger format
um,
obviously is good for certain a lot of things, such as low light and things like that. But then again, if you are a proper photographer and proper filmmakers, and either way, you all know what you need. You need light. Like without light, you can never get an image. And so like if you don't have lights, no matter how much ISO you can push the camera, you're not going to get good quality anyway. So you just bear that in mind. And this is why, if you go to really high-end commercial shoots and you see, they have lots of lights there, artificial lights. Even in the natural light environments, they will use lights to fill here and there just to get the best quality possible. And same in films, like if you go to any scenes when you see them filming, you find like there are absolutely hundreds and hundreds of different LEDs, different lights everywhere just to create the environment for filming. And so light is everything. It's easier to say that, oh, this camera can shoot ISO 52,000 whatever 1 million, you name a number these days. I mean, they all can do that. But then again, would you really ever gonna shoot that high? And unless
oh,
you really
it's Jimmy, it's such hard work fixing up lights. Can't we just bump up the ISO? No, but it's
Yeah.
it's true though, because you don't get the same look.
No,
Because
no.
there are occasions when very low light can be spectacular,
Mm.
but there are lots of other occasions where it's just very flat and boring, and you
Yep.
need some extra lights just to add a bit of drama and interest. So it is about the lights, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So yep.
so I was only going to say, alternate reality's experience with his A7R3 mirrors something that kind of happened to me. I had a bit of an issue with the Sony A1, which I was testing soon after it came out,
Yeah.
and Sony's raving about the stabilization. So I tried it and thought, it's a bit rubbish. It doesn't steady up until about 2 or 3 seconds into the filming.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I queried it and they said, oh, don't know anything about that. It's brilliant. So I thought no more
Yeah.
of it. Then a few weeks later, there was a firmware update because apparently there's a bug whereby the stabilization didn't cut in until 2 or 3 seconds after you started filming.
Oh,
I thought,
really?
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sony. That's what I thought. But so there's a lot more to stay. The stabilization has to be programmed correctly. It has to work. It has to have
Yeah.
the right algorithms. It's complicated, really.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, Eugene also mentioned about light as well just now, and the grabbing light is not the same as controlling it. That is also very true. It's no
yeah,
point getting all the light and having full blast, and then you know, yeah, it's all about reading light, like how you understand light
yeah,
and things like that, how you fall lost to the subjects and how great the gradient works, and things like that. It's an art form by itself. But then again,
yeah,
photography or filmmaking is all about light. So like you need to be able to interpret that light and make use of it if you are shooting available light. And then if you start using artificial lights, then again you're starting to have to manipulate them, and then you realize that there are a lot more than just turn it on, like setting the setting the
yeah,
intensity. You really have to kind of get a feel of it, and looking at the screen and monitor and making sure that everything looks balanced or to the feel that you would like to look eventually after post productions. And yeah, it's a whole topic altogether, and we can certainly dig in a little bit more about lights in the futures, and if anyone interested in more about photography and filmmaking, sort of lighting and things, because it's a very interesting subject. Not a lot of people actually ignore them, and for the fact that every single time I do something about lights in my YouTube channel, people just switch off, people don't want to know about lights,
Well,
but in
that
fact,
hard work.
but but in fact, light
Well,
is very important. I'm telling you. So is audio. You know, someone mentioned audio early on in today's chat. They said audio is also as important as anything else, and which is
yeah,
totally
yeah,
true. Which is totally true. You can't watch a movie with bad audio. You know, you just be like horrible, right? You know, imagine if you're if you're watching a movie and it sounded like an AM radio. You know, it's gonna be really horrible, right? It's just like tinny, no bass, you know, no surround. It's gonna be really horrible. It's gonna ruin the entire experience. So in filmmaking, there's definitely more than just the lens and the camera. There's a lot more
yeah,
elements to it. And photography, obviously, we really told you about, you know, it's not just about the camera and the lens, and light is also very important. In a commercial environment, that's why you see studio photographer or commercial photographer using speed lights and strobes and things that are outdoor, because they need to blast into fill lights to it to create the drama, create the actual proper lighting to it, to make sure that you get the right look with and the balance between the background and the foreground, and all kinds of things they need to consider. So yeah, it's definitely way more than just simply holding camera out and shoot your subject.
so
And of course, you know, experienced outdoor photographer can work with the light, but then again, light changes all the time. If you want consistent result, artificial light is the only way to go.
so so you mentioning lights. Corey asked a little bit earlier. He's doing a senior photo shoot, and he
Oh
wondered if
yes.
anyone had any tips. And I thought, if anyone did, Jimmy, you would. Um,
Ah,
but I guess it depends on whether Corey does portraits a lot or whether it's an occasional thing.
yeah,
And I guess it's going to depend on the type of senior you're dealing with. I think if
yeah.
it's a type of senior who wishes they weren't a senior, you might have to be a bit more sympathetic with the lighting. But if you're photographing a male subject, sometimes I don't know what you think, Jimmy. The
Yeah,
dramatic harsh look is what you want. You're
yeah.
not trying
Well,
to smooth them over. You're trying to show them as they are, their
yeah.
character.
Well, thanks, Corey, for asking that question. And first of all, there are two things there. First of all, I need to find out exactly what senior photographer you're talking about, because in the UK, when we talk about senior photographer, we talk about photographing people a slightly older age. In
Yeah,
America,
I think that's what he meant.
yeah,
Is it not?
yeah,
Not.
senior photography obviously means the young people getting graduating. So
Oh,
that that
I
that
see. I
yeah.
see. Right.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it really depends
yeah,
what you are talking about. If you talk about the
yeah,
US, and then they basically you talk about photographing teenagers, and
yeah.
so it's kind of, yeah, I don't know why they're so different between here and the UK, and yeah, we mean totally different thing here. But because I shoot.
Separated by common language.
Yes, yeah, even though the same word, but they mean different things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but I photograph seniors from US, so I do know exactly what you mean. And but I also photograph seniors in this country, so I
Right.
also know what you mean.
Okay.
So in either case, you are doing a portrait session. Let's put it that way. So to simplify, and the best thing to do is to bring the character out. I think that's the only thing. I think one person already replied, and I think it's Chengo. Is it Chengo? And already replied that about how you should bring out the characters. Yeah, or high school senior. Yeah, that's it. High school senior. So it is teenagers. So
Oh, it
yeah.
is. Is it? Right. Okay. Right.
So basically, I think the best thing to do is to communicate and spend the first 10-15 minutes learning about a subject, and that's what I usually do. And have a chat with them, make them feel comfortable with you, trying to find a common ground they can talk to, and what sort of thing they're interested, and things like that. And this whole should be very smooth and straightforward, because a lot of seniors or in the, you know, these teenagers, they are quite good now these days, because they're so used to Instagram. They are very uh, uh, almost trained in a way, you know, and how they want themselves to look and things like that. Because they tend to look in mirrors a lot to see what sort of angle they do, because they do a lot of photos. In a way, it's good. In a way, it's really good, and make our lives as a photographer a lot easier in a way. And so they know exactly how to face the camera, so that's to start with. It's almost like a trained model in a way. And but it's definitely very, very interesting to see that. And also, I think the most important thing is to get their character out, because that's the whole point of doing a portrait, regardless of what genre, what age they are. You know, the main thing about photography, portrait photography, is is to bring their inner self out to the lens. So so by talking to them, by learning the characters, then by speaking their language, is definitely going to help to make sure that, first of all, the photo looks natural. Second, they can see themselves in the photos. That's the main thing. And I know some may prefer to have a more fabricated look, and so this is also something that you can learn from talking to them initially before you even starting to click too many photos. But I would say I would always do that by talking and snapping at the same time. So those first few shots are usually useless to me, you know, but it's only getting them know that I'm taking photographs and sticking used to my camera, getting close to them, just to make them all feel more comfortable. And this is kind of usually my tactics, and for any sort of portrait photography. And I do this on a daily basis, so I can kind of tell you that that's usually what I do. And so talking a lot helps. And if you can't, still maybe just try a few conversations by learning about what they like, what they don't like, and then by then you can see how you can angle yourself, how you can make use of the situations, and maximize the effect by how they usually like their photo being taken. You know, ask them to show you her Instagram account, for instance. That usually a very good hint and very good starting point, because they will show you the photos and you can kind of look at how they post themselves in a way, and they can kind of get that gist of it and know the characters through that way, if you don't want to talk too much. But that is usually quite a start. So yeah, so hopefully
Yeah,
that's a hint.
it sounds like talking and shooting at the same time from what Alan's saying about introverted
Yes.
subjects. Talking and shooting, I don't shoot portraits like you do, Jimmy, but it's the only thing that's ever worked for me. So I've photographed some people who just don't like being photographed, and
Yep.
other people who think they know how they should look and they don't really. And
Mm.
if you just talk and shoot and distract them from what you're doing
Yep.
and take a lot of pictures, you've got a better chance of capturing something that really is them
Oh
rather
yeah,
than
yeah,
what
yeah,
they
yeah.
think rather than what they think is them.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And Alan said it already, and I think David also suggested
Yeah.
a few things. Yeah, it's all it's all about connections at the end of the day, and then
Yeah.
how you connect them, whether they're extrovert, introvert, and then it's all about making them feel comfortable, making them feel like you are, yeah, what Alan said, you know, making them feel like you are a friend, you know, in a way. So you're
And
not really a professional, you're just a friend, you know, trying to snap photos.
it's perhaps like a trusting as well, especially with somebody a bit camera shy. You're not going to shoot anything they don't like.
No,
It's a
no.
collaboration,
Yep.
so that at the end of it, the photographs that you keep will be the ones that you both like. You're not trying
Yep.
to steal something that makes them look stupid, because that's
Yeah,
what they're
yeah,
going
yeah.
to be worried about. They're going to be
Yep.
worried about looking stupid.
Yep,
So
absolutely, absolutely. And
yeah,
yeah, just looking at David's also suggestion, get her engaged, talking about something she likes,
yeah,
loves, and yeah, absolutely,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's all about getting into their head, and also like making sure that they're comfortable with you as a photographer. So you know, like many times when I photograph seniors, and you know, by the end of the shoots, I could even like take her out for a drink, take him out for a party, and kind of thing. You know, he's almost had that feeling. You know, towards the end, you know,
yeah,
they feel that
yeah,
I'm not just the guy who have a camera trying to photograph them, but I'm actually a friend. You know, genuinely interested in what they're talking about,
yeah.
and what they like and things like that. I think that really is the moment. And I will even go as far as that, not just for seniors, but like for any ages. I mean, I photograph families of all ages. I photograph kids. I photograph, you know, older people. It's the same thing. You really need to get into the zone. You need to get into the characters, get into, you know, the lives, you know, and trying to ask them things. And yeah, it always helps, and it makes a big help when they finally snap that, press that button, and you capture the smile is genuine smile. You capture that the
Yeah.
look is the genuine look, not fabricated, not asking them to, oh, can you smile for the camera, please? Can you look this way, that
Yeah.
way?
Turn
Yeah,
that way. Another three eighths of an inch this way. Tilt your head back. No, turn your eyes slightly towards me. No, not that far.
yeah,
But I've been on some pretty awful shoots with portrait photographers as a kind of documentary of what's going on. I used to do a lot of features whereby we get a professional and a reader. The
yeah,
professional would
yeah,
show the reader what to do, and I'd photograph the whole thing, write it as a feature.
Yeah.
But I've met a few portrait photographers who've had the most awful attitude, and it's been like,
Oh.
no, no, you think it's not. This is don't think of this as a person. It's not a person. It's an object.
No.
You know, this is a
Yeah.
prop. This is the
Yeah.
thing we have in the photograph.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need
Yeah.
to talk to them. We don't need to know about their lives. We just
Yeah.
tell them what to do for the photograph. And I think, thank goodness, that attitude has changed, because that is just
You
awful to be
well,
around. I hope
you
so.
may be surprised. You may be surprised.
Yeah,
I have a few photographer friends in Hong Kong, and then I don't know how many of you actually photograph models, you know, for commercials,
yeah,
and my friends is one of those, and he photographed fashion, so in Hong Kong for magazines and stuff like that. And I've been to his shoots, and you know, just to basically visit him and to have a chat, and so I saw him working, and he was very much and a robot in a way, and then
yeah.
he
Okay.
has no empathy on how the model feels or whatever, you know, like in a way, to me it's kind of like the opposite, you know. I don't like, okay, with all due respect, you know, and I mean his way, you know, obviously he has his way of working. It obviously makes sense to him, and he worked because he's getting jobs. And but
Yeah.
for me, seeing someone screaming and shouting at models is not really the way I do things. And then yeah,
I
it's
mean,
just different way of working.
a professional model is another thing again. You wouldn't photograph a professional model in the same way as an amateur model, and vice versa,
Mm,
because they a professional model, I guess, expects to do a certain amount of performing, acting, and knows some poses to do this and the other. An amateur model doesn't know any of this,
mm.
so you have to help them. It's
Yeah, I mean,
it's
yeah, of course, of course. I mean, I photograph commercial models, and but then again, you know, like I'm not the type of person who like to be too harsh on the subject, you know, and yeah, I mean, if I want something, I'd rather talk through it with them and try to understand, you know, exactly how they can perform the best that I would like to, and
have you
because
have you ever watched the film Blow Up from
no,
the
no,
60s? Famous film, photographer, very much like David Bailey. He if you ever get to watch it, he is that sort of photographer. He
mm,
yells at models,
yep,
and
yep.
that's quite hard to be around.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they still around, and then I
Yeah.
know there's certain vibe about, you know, in the fashion industries about certain people taking charge and things like that,
Yeah,
and
okay.
but this is why I don't shoot a lot of commercial stuff in that sort of area. I mean, I photograph
Yeah.
normal people on a daily basis more, and
Normal people.
normal people.
Yeah.
And Carl just replied that I'm so glad I don't photograph people. I prefer animals. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
Uh,
they can be a pain in the ass as well, animals, but
Yeah. But then
I
again,
mean,
now, yeah, go on. Sorry, Rod.
I would do a lot more portrait photography if I knew enough people who liked having their picture taken, but I don't. Um, so it's
You
something I'm very interested in,
you would be
because
surprised if you
on
ask around your neighbors.
maybe yeah, yeah, but a man of a certain age asking people if he can take their photograph, it doesn't always look good. But yeah, I could ask. But what I'm always struck by with portraits is how somebody looks when you speak to them, and their face is animated and moving, and it's kind of animated from within. A still photograph can look completely different, and you can think, you can look at a person and think they will be a fabulous subject, and you can't get a photograph that looks right. And there are
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah,
people where
yeah.
you look at them and think they're terribly ordinary, but then when you take a photograph, you think that's amazing. They just change completely. So it's that I found that a challenge.
Hmm. Yes, it
Yeah,
is. I mean, certainly it doesn't always convey the same message when you look at the final image, and but then again, it really depends on the objective of the photo shoots, and in what they want to get out of at the end of the day, and
yeah.
quite
Carl,
often you, yeah, sorry.
Carl, don't come to me for a portrait. You'll regret that forever. Go and see Jimmy. Go and see somebody who does it for a living, not somebody who's an amateur.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't say that because everyone at some point will take some portrait, whether for the mum, the sister, brother. You never know. But then again, I think family members probably be easier. Um, okay, so that's interesting. And how did we get sidetracked to portraits? And we were talking about gear.
It's Corey's fault because he asked a question, so it's his
Ah,
fault.
I see, I
But
see.
no, it's interesting in this. It's connected in the sense that it's all about light, isn't it? And if you're
It is.
into portrait
Yes.
photography,
Yep.
if you're asking yourself what's the best camera and what's the best lens,
Mm,
you're only asking half the questions.
yes.
You've got to think, where am I going to do this? How are these
Yep.
portraits going to look?
Mm,
What kind of gear do I need for those circumstances? And if you're going to be a commercial portrait photographer, you're going to need some lights and you're going to need a studio
yep.
or some
Yep.
locations that are going to suit you. You're going to
Yep.
have to figure that out before you start worrying about the camera. The
Yes.
camera is just a thing you
And
figure out at the end.
and another thing is quite struck me as well is about this eye face focus thing, and which always puzzles me a little bit. And even though that I know they are quite useful, and but in portrait photography, unless it's a very specific aesthetic you want to go for, you don't want just the eye in focus and everything is blurry, including your nose. So like
No,
in
I
in,
mean,
in any given instances, and most of the time if you use a long focal length and very fast lens, you would not
yeah.
use the fast aperture like 1.2 0.95 shooting up close when you
Oh,
just the eyeball in focus.
that's the trouble, isn't it, with using. I mean, the standard portrait lens these days, if you're talking full frame, it's 85 1.4, maybe 1.2. But if you use those wide open, which is probably why you bought them, it's got IAF for which eye do you
Yep.
want sharp? Because it won't both be. And sometimes it'll be, oh, do you want the iris sharp or do you want the eyelashes sharp? Because they're not exactly the same distance. And
No. No.
you can get yourself in a bit of a mess. And you think I'm joking, but one of my colleagues used an 85 1.2 for all his work, and he said he couldn't use it wide open for that reason.
No.
Um, it was also a bit slow to focus, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that it's not just that you couldn't get both eyes sharp, you couldn't get all of one eye sharp if you're close enough for a head and
Oh
shoulders
yeah.
shot
Yeah.
or just a face. So he would hardly ever use it wide open for that reason because
Yep.
it's just impractical. It sounds wonderful, and if you get everything right, the aesthetics look amazing.
Yep.
But very often, it's just too much
Yeah,
or too
well,
little.
this goes back to the same topics of depth of field, and
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
you need to determine the depth of field. You need to cover the subjects in focus, and very often people nowadays are completely ignoring that. When you get a
yeah.
1.2, like I said, oh, get a 1.2 lens, we gotta shoot wide open because that's what I bought it for. I pay all that money for the one point.
Yeah,
I bought.
exactly.
I
Yeah.
pay 3 grand for 1.2 lens. I gotta use the 1.2, otherwise my money's not worth. I might as well get a 1.8 or 2.8.
All my
But
friends will laugh at me if I don't use it wide
yeah,
open.
but
But
people think that way.
so what would you say? Would you say face sharp? It doesn't matter if the ears are starting to go slightly,
No,
or do you
I
like
would
the
get
whole of the head sharp?
I would get a whole head sharp. Yes, I would get a whole head
So
sharp.
in that case, what you're talking about there is not shallow depth of field. You're talking about depth of field management. So
Yes.
you're talking about having enough depth of field to get the whole head sharp, and then enough separation from the background
Yep.
to make the background blurred. It's all about managing the distances and the
Correct.
spaces, isn't it? It's not
Yes.
about the camera.
Yes. Absolutely. And to give you a very real examples that I do on the daily basis is that I take my clients to Westminster Bridge a lot to take portraits, and they want a big Ben in the background, and so I often have to walk certain distance to do that shot because I wanted to control the distance between the subject and the big Ben, and how much I will be standing in front of him or her. And
Yeah,
so like it's all about managing the distance and your aperture,
yeah,
making sure that whoever I'm photographing in front of the lens has to be in focus sharp, but the background separated. Yeah, that's fine. And
yeah,
but very often if you don't understand that theory and you would just shoot everything wide open, ignoring the distance and everything, then you often find yourself, oh, I blur everything. Yeah, the background's all blurred, but you also find that ears or maybe even the mouth is out of focus.
yeah,
Well, when you look up
yeah.
close, and that may
Or
not look right.
maybe the ring that one of them has just been given isn't
Yep.
sharp. They
Yeah.
come along and say,
You
"No,
know,
I'm really not sharp."
because that, and don't get me wrong, depth of field is very useful for me. That
Yeah,
I play with depth of field to create an almost like a film. Filmmaking. You created a narrative, a direction of a focus of how you
yeah,
want to draw people's attention when they view the images. So that's very very important. But then if you ignore the minor details, such as where is this focus, where is it not focus, and that makes a big difference in terms of ultimate quality and the outcome of the photograph, whether it's an acceptable image or totally unusable. And for me, I remember I did use a 85 1.2 and a Canon lens, and before that was one of my favorite portrait lenses in the past.
yeah,
And very much like your colleagues, I never shot a 1.2. I most likely stopped down to f2 2.8 to do that. And
yeah,
but if I want to pop, I can shoot from distance, do a full body shot, and shoot at 1.2. That's when I get the full subject in focus, while still separating it
yeah,
from the background. And that is a very cool
yeah,
look that 85 1.2 can give you.
yeah. But depth of field control, there's a lot more to it than simply lenses and apertures.
Yes.
It's distances and where you stand as well.
Yep. Yep.
There's a very
So
big factor.
so this is absolutely what we've been talking about: getting the right gear for the right jobs. And many of you
Yeah,
might think that, oh yeah, what? So why do you need a 1.2 and things like that as well? Uh, I guess like you can get 1.8. There's no, to be honest, these days 1.8 lenses are just as good as 1.2. And yeah, you may lose out a little bit, maybe construction wise, maybe weather sealing, maybe the ultimate sharpness if you really go pixel peeping. But in reality, most of the time you find yourself, those shots coming from 1.8 lens is totally usable and do 95.6% of things that you need to do. And even with micro four third lenses, I know that the 1.8 prime lenses are good. They are really good lenses. They're tiny, they're cheap. You don't
yeah,
have to pay 4 times the price for 1.2 if you don't need it. The
yeah,
situation, I guess, when you need to use 1.2 or faster lenses is perhaps when you need the to get more ambient light into your lens, and that's when you really want to think about 1.2. For people who
Oh,
spend
sorry, be right back.
yeah, sure, majority of your time shooting in daylight and not in low light situations, then perhaps 1.2 lenses would mean absolutely nothing for you. And don't think about they are better quality in any way. And to be quite honest, yes, there is some quality differences there, but I don't think it's significant enough for you to pay 4 times the price for a 1.2 lens. It's definitely not the case. But for certain situations, especially for commercials and professionals, when they do encounter difficult and challenging lighting situations, that's when that extra money you pay worth that money, because 1.2 may not sound a lot compared to 1.8, but when you in a tricky situations, that shutter speed between 150 and a 180th can make a dramatic difference in terms of stopping the motion. And or even camera shake. Camera shake these days is being counteracted by Ibis these days, so I'm not too worried about that. It's more about motion blur by the subject. So 150 and 180 can make a huge difference. So 1.2 and 1.8 can save an image in a professional environment. And but if you're not in that situation, in that scenarios, and I guess I wouldn't suggest anyone to buy a 1.2 lens because it is a 1.2 or it is a professional lens. 1.8 is perfectly fine. So anyone who's listening right now who use 1.8 lenses will agree with me, or those who are considering getting a pro lenses, if you already have the 1.8, think again. And I'm not trying to discourage you from getting 1.2 lenses. It's all good. I can have a code, you can use my account, and then I can get some commission too if you want. And then but besides the joke, and then yeah, I think that just have to evaluate whether you do need a 1.2 aperture. And it's not about depth of field. We just talked about that. It's not about the bokeh and the depth of field, because you can do that with the 1.8 lens. Just play around with your distance a little bit. You can get the 1.2 look in a 1.8 lens because they're so close. So you can actually easier to create that look as well. And so think about that. You only use 1.2 if you really, really need it for certain type of lighting situations,
Yeah,
or when you do know that you are going to encounter a very tricky situations on a consistent basis, not just once. Because otherwise, why do you
yeah,
get a 1.2 lens, for using it for once? It's a consistent thing. And the reason I have all the 1.2 lenses is because I shoot outdoor a lot. I do encounter tricky situation lighting on a daily basis, changing lights, low light, whatever. So 1.2 lenses is helps my job, and but I would not discourage anyone to get 1.8 lenses. They are just equally good.
Can I answer David's question, because he's saying he's thinking of dabbling in portrait photography.
Mm.
He's picked up on the idea that setting is critical. He doesn't have a studio, and wonder what else I need to try it. I'm aware I'm saying this in a company of a professional, so get ready to shoot me down, Jimmy. But I'm quite cheap and lazy when it comes to lighting. So I was going to say, all I would suggest to David is find a window, because it's a very nice light. It's not very bright, but it's probably bright enough. And see if you can get hold of a protection screen like people use for slides. Put it on the other side of your subject, and you've got a wonderful reflector. And there you've got the lighting set up straight off. No
Yeah,
artificial light. You might have to wind up the ISO a little bit depending on your window. But
yeah.
I light a lot of stuff, mainly pictures of cameras and kit and lenses and stuff like that.
Mm.
Just using that window light reflector.
Yeah,
It's a nice soft light. It's very flattering for people, and just by moving them further back from the window or towards you, you can change the direction of the light, or you change your position from, like, you can have side light or 3/4 light, and some kind of reflective surface the other side. Could be a sheet.
yeah,
Just throws a bit of light back in the shadows. Sorry,
yeah.
Jimmy. I'm
No, no,
I'm
no, no.
treading on your turf here.
It's all good. It's all good. Funny you mentioned about things like that, and also another accessories that many people may have ignored in recent years is reflectors, and they
Yeah,
are
yeah.
cheap. They're
Of
cheap
course,
and
of course.
cheerful. You can get them for like £20 or whatever, $30 in the US.
Yeah,
They are actually very effective on bouncing light to the subject's face if you get a very high contrast scenes, and if you're afraid of using flash or any strobes and things, or just don't want to carry too much, a reflector is light, foldable. Such put it in your camera bag, doesn't weigh anything. It's cheap, really.
cool.
You don't mind losing them as well. So they are really effective for bouncing certain light to the faces or the subject. And yeah, they are good accessories to have. And yeah, it not they're not difficult to use either. Some of them will actually have a plastic
No,
handle, so you can actually use one hand holding and one hand holding the camera and do just shoot it
yeah.
like this. It's quite useful.
I've I've had to do that in the past for just ad hoc stuff where you've got the camera in one hand, a reflector in the other, and you're just moving it,
Yep,
to get the right look, and then you snap and you've done it. It's not very
yep,
professional, but it's a very quick and dirty way to
yep.
bounce light where you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff. So, any other questions you want to ask me and Rod and I? This will be the kind of like towards the end of our session before we wrap up. And this very interesting talk. I really enjoyed today's session, and thank you for everyone who contributing all the different answers there. And yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, just to summarize everything we talked about today, and we asked the question about how many formats and each one of you are using, whether you use primarily just one format. Like when I say formats, like micro four third full frame, APS-C, medium format. Or you use multiple systems, and how you use them by means of whether you use one system at any one time, or use or mix and match 2 or 3 systems at any given time for both stills or videos. And then we talked about getting the right gear for the right jobs. We talked about resolution, all kinds of stuff. So if you missed all that, you can very welcome. You can actually go back to rewatch the beginning of our chat today, and it's all very interesting. And I think that is something to be thinking about as you are starting out. Even if you're thinking about acquiring new gear. It's also quite a good educational content today. We're discussing about sometimes getting more may not actually getting the reward that you may want, because you may be wasting your money, wasting your time by getting something that is basically over what you will be needed for your submissions or for your clients and things like that. For personal use, I never discourage anybody from buying gear, because if you have the money, go for it. If that what makes you happy. But in the commercial terms, it's a very different story. I still see studio on the high street studio still using, believe me or not, Canon 400D in the studio. Why? Because they don't need more. If the light is being controlled, they don't need the dynamic range. They know exactly what they have to produce. There's no clipping
Yeah,
anywhere
yeah,
because it's control light. Like someone just said,
yeah.
was it David who said it? So it's all control light. All they care about is resolution. But then again, 400D may not have the highest resolution. In fact, it's very low resolution by today's standard. But they are producing a product that's printed on A4 papers. They print on mugs, printing on canvases. Canvases actually, you don't need high resolution anyway for canvases because the fabric you're printing on, and so like they don't need it. So why
No,
spending more money in getting something the business doesn't need? And that means I'm just wasting more money.
I think that example you've given is exactly applies to all professional photographers. They need a camera which will do exactly what they want it to do every single time. They know it inside out. They know what it'll do and how it'll react. They don't have to worry about that. And that is perhaps the definition of a professional camera, one that you know will give you exactly the result you want if you do things in exactly the same way. It's predictable and reliable, just
Yep.
does the job.
And also bring into another
But
argument. Another argument is 400D, Canon 400D was
I've
not
got
a
one. I've got one, Jimmy. I've got one in my
really.
cupboard. Yeah,
And
that's where it's
400,
staying.
yeah, and
That's one.
400D
Yeah.
wasn't even a professional camera by design.
No.
It was a
No.
consumer camera,
No.
but it's been used in a professional environment. So then again,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
argument
Yeah.
people saying, like, oh, professional camera, this and that. If I'm making money, I need to get a professional camera. Only if you need that weather seal, only if you need this and that, only if you need. Remember, it's need, not about want in a business
Yeah.
environment. And ultimately, if they can produce an image that you need to sell, that's your professional tool. And there's no right or wrong answers there. And same argument goes to the 1.8 lens or the 1.2 lens. The same argument there.
Yeah.
There's no difference there whatsoever.
Don't buy more of what you've already got. Think about whether there are things you need that you haven't got, whether
Are
it's
we
lights or a tripod or whatever.
are we having a therapy session here to get people off the
Yeah.
gas syndrome?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. Because I'm feeling a lot of need out there, or is it in here?
uh,
It might be in here actually.
I've sensed a lot of want in my space here.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely once. Yeah,
I
yeah,
definitely want a lot of stuff, but I don't think I need a lot of stuff. And that's the trouble now. And I definitely
yeah.
got way too many lenses to start with, and then yeah, I definitely can't use all of them.
No, no. I've got too many lenses,
Yeah,
too many cameras, too many lenses.
yeah,
I've also got too many tripods.
I have a lot
I've
of
got,
tripods too.
I've got,
Yes.
I think I've got 10 now because I keep getting sent tripods for review, and I have become a bit of a tripod nerd, even though I rarely use them because
Oh,
the kind of stuff I shoot and where I need to shoot it doesn't
may,
really
may,
lend itself to
maybe
tripods.
we should do a episode about tripods and talk about tripods. Since you're a nerd now, so we can talk about
Oh,
tripods.
that's a whole series, Jimmy. I could talk about tripods for the next 10 episodes. I'm sure we'd all like that, wouldn't we? Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay.
No,
Final comment here. I think from Andrew. There's too much
yeah,
want driving people into the non-pro
yeah,
market.
yeah, 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 yeah.
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 And
Driving
he also
people in the
replied.
non-pro market. Yeah.
And then he replied, "You can never have too many tripods."
You, Andrew, take a look in my garage and tell me that again because you can. You honestly can. But actually, maybe it would be interesting if we did a thing on tripods, monopods, and gimbals.
Tripod, monopod, and
Interesting.
gimbal.
And I don't know if there's still a thing, but even Steadicams. Because if you're going back to aesthetics, there are lots of people who think so. Steadicams are like the precursor to gimbals,
Oh
where
yeah,
everything's stabilized with springs and levers and counterweights.
yep,
And
yep,
there's
yep.
still people who think a Steadicam gives you a better look than a gimbal
Yes,
because
yes,
it's more organic. So
yep.
maybe we could do a thing on support because I think there's a lot to say about
Yes.
tripods for video versus stills as well, and ball heads versus three-way heads and geared heads.
Oh, so
Somebody stop me now. Stop me now, Jimmy.
any gear nerds out there are into tripods. We'll do a talk about supports in
Yeah.
general, and what is best for what, whether you agree or whether you're a gimbal users and think that, you know, that's the best way forward, instead of using counterweight, the traditional method, or someone just saying, you know, oh, just handheld Ibis is really good enough, I don't need anything else, or the old school way, tripod, plonk it on there, stable as hell, you know, like you don't have to worry about a thing. And yeah, it'll be a good thing, because I would like to see how the different type of photographers and video guys out there, and what do you think about supports, because a lot of people also like ignoring the fact that, that supports are still critical in a lot of different works, and especially landscape, you know, commercial filmings, you know, they still use a lot of supports, and the reason why, because they give you the result that you want, and that's all about getting something you want.
They take away so many problems. Tripods are a pain to carry and set up, but they solve so many problems.
Yes, they
So,
do, and also Chris Palmer's essay and
yeah.
bags.
Oh no, yeah, bags. I've got lots to say about bags as well. Yeah, I've got more bags than tripods.
I can echo the same. Why are we getting the bags and tripods now? We just talk about we're a hoarder now. We just like to get too many things.
Well, if you've got all this kit, you've got to have bags to put it in.
That's true. I used my bags now as lens storage now. They all just like,
oh yeah,
they're all inside bags now.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well,
all right.
That's been a fun talk today, and thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We're talking about all this stuff. Yeah, hopefully that we're gonna have another cool section next week, and let us know in the comment section below after this live stream or afterward when you restream the whole thing, and if you missed certain bits of it, and let us know what sort of thing, whether you agree what we talked about this afternoon, and also what sort of thing you would like to talk about in the future, and we can certainly make adjustments, and also listen to all your comments to see what we can make this channel more fun. Good stuff. Well, until next time, everybody enjoy your day. I know everyone in the UK at the moment are battered by rain and wet weather, so like stay dry. That's what I can say for the people in the UK. But anywhere else, if you have sunny days, and go out and shoot some more stuff. Until next time, I guess I will say goodbye for now. So until next time, I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.